Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to your Monday edition of Pelicans Daily, brought to you by Fan Arch. I'm your host, David Grubb, editor in chief of thebirdrights.com. And it's finally over. The New Orleans Pelicans 24-25 season comes to a disappointing end, an expected end, though, as they lose to the Oklahoma City Thunder on Sunday to finish the season 21-61. Um, Pelicans, look, neither team had their starting rosters, obviously the starting lineups out on the court, their normal starting lineups. The Thunder preparing for the playoffs after their best season in franchise history. And you could argue, and I think I would argue, that the Pelicans are finishing the worst season in franchise history. Though they record wise are not officially the worst, the 2004-05 team still holds the record with the fewest amount of wins at 18. This is the worst win loss record since then. But I think when you consider what was expected during the preseason and what happened during the season, this is the worst and most disappointing season in the history of the franchise. Again, if you want to talk about 2004-05, that was a franchise that decided early on that season that they were ready to rebuild. You know, they had moved from Charlotte to New Orleans. Were looking to move on past the veteran guys, Baron Davis, Jamal Mashburn, Jamal McGlure, all of those guys. They were ready to move on. And they did so. They had a first year coach at the time in Byron Scott who had made the transition over from the New Jersey Nets. Um, and they decided we're going to be bad. This team wasn't supposed to be bad. And I think even with the injuries, as you take those things into consideration, they shouldn't have been this bad. You don't go from a top 10 defense to the 29th defense in the NBA. You don't become a team that has these tremendous losses. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But you don't have the kind of season that you have simply because of injuries. That means that there's a cataclysmic failure on all levels when your team finishes 21-61, the way that the Pelicans did. When you look at the numbers, when you look behind the losses, there are just so many bad things that happened this season. The weekend was a horrible way to kind of end the season because it was a reminder of everything that, I mean, it was just a capsule, really. You know, you go to Friday night's home game against the Miami Heat, and it outlines just how bad this team has been against the East over not just this season, but over the last 4 years. The Pelicans finished with just 8 wins against Eastern Conference teams this season, and that is horrible when you're talking about the Eastern Conference, the conference that has like 4 teams under 500 in the play-in tournament. It's that bad, and Miami is one of those teams just barely getting into the play-in because somebody has to be 10th. You know, and the Pelicans lost to them by giving up the most points in franchise history, by having the biggest loss, 49 points in franchise history. And then you follow that up with another double digit loss on Sunday in the season finale. And it just was, looking across the court, if you're a Pelicans fan and you're looking down on the floor, what you were looking at is basically a Black Mirror episode, because everything that you wanted, it was like the Twilight Zone, if for a little older reference for folks my age. It was everything that you look at the Thunder, and everything that they are is what the Pelicans expected to be starting in 2019. And everything that they've done has worked without tanking, because they were bad, yes, but they weren't actively tanking like the Philadelphia 76ers were. Because this is my firm belief that you cannot lose your way into winning. You have to be trying to win. You may be what the Thunder did, taking on bad contracts, bringing in players, who weren't bad players but had bad contracts like a Gordon Hayward. But they still had an understanding of their purpose and where they were headed. And now you're talking about a team that won 68 games with a bunch of players who are pretty young. You found your MVP caliber talent through trade in picking up SGA. And since then, with only one top 5 draft pick, Chet Holmgren, the Oklahoma City Thunder have been one of the best teams in the league the last 2 seasons. They've made the playoffs consistently during that time, even with the bad years mixed in. And they turned it around quickly, and they still have a treasure trove of draft picks, and they still have all the young talent in the world. They sat as many players as the Pelicans did on Sunday, and yet their reserves, by and large, were better than everybody else the Pelicans had on the floor. Look, yes, you got another quality performance out of Antonio Reeves, and I've sung his praises. I think Antonio Reeves has made a definitive case that he should be the be in the position that Jordan Hawkins was given. He should be in that position. He's shows that he can move without the basketball. His shot has been better and more on target more often already than anything we saw out of Jordan Hawkins. He doesn't have a lingering back issue. He has shown each year of his college career that he got better. He has gotten better throughout this season. And when given the opportunity to start, he's taken advantage of it and hasn't made bad plays. There are times when you've had to encourage him, I think, to be little bit more aggressive. But when you sat the bench the entire year and you're playing without the best players, it's a little harder to find a rhythm. But even within that, he's been able to shoot the ball well. He's been able to show his skill set. So I think, yeah, you've gotten a good thing out of him. And I think that today, on Sunday as well, outside of those young players, what could you possibly have learned about this team? So I don't take many things away from the end of the season, and I think fans need to be careful and pump the brakes a lot on some of the efforts that you saw at the end of the season, because you have to remember when guys are healthy, or it put these other players that you kind of fall in love with in a lost season because you got to watch them play and they got minutes. Are they going to play on a good team? So I think when you ask those questions about the rest of the guys who kind of got minutes, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, though he had a double double on Sunday, he's not coming back. You know what I'm saying? Jeremiah Robinson Earl is not coming back next year, so you're not thinking about his future. Jamal Cain, he's not coming back. If he does, it'll be as a G League player, so you're not worried about his future. I don't. Whatever he did is not exceptional to me. Elfrid Payton, um, Elfrid Payton is a veteran on the end of his career who's very limited as a shooter. He made his first three since 2022 on Sunday. And of course, he hasn't played continuously since then. But for him to have not made a three in 20 games with the Pelicans just shows you that he's not suited as a starting point guard in the NBA anymore. You can't have these games with double digit assists and single digit points just over and over again every night. Just can't happen. And he's not a good defender. And he's not a great rebounder, and he's not a good shooter. So you take those things and you're not worried about his future either. There's so many guys that I'm not worried about their futures. I'm not thinking about what they've done. So, when you look at the end of this season, and particularly these final couple games, I think that you're narrowing it down to just the rookie class and what they did. And out of that group, Antonio Reeves is really the one, and Yves Misi are the two obviously in best position next year to come in and be contributors. I think Keon Brooks, again, if you're talking about Keon Brooks and putting him at the end, as a ninth or 10th man to grow into that Najee Marshall role, he's cheap, he's versatile, he's long, he's athletic, and he showed he needs to work on his 3-point shot. I think he pushes it a little bit too much. Like it's a very hard and like it hits the backside of the rim when he shoots. If it hits the back, it goes in. But if he hits it wrong, it shoots off to the other side of the basket. So he certainly needs to work on his 3-point shot. But at the minutes that he'll be playing, all you want for him is to take that open three, take the shot. And I think he's willing to do that. But as a defender and as somebody who could play in the open court, okay, he's a fit. Carlo Makovich, again, and I've said this repeatedly, I think the problem with Carlo is he's still at best your third big. At best. He's more likely your fourth. I think he's comparable to Billy Hernan Gomez in that, he's a more athletic, less skilled Billy Hernan Gomez, because Billy was a guy who was a veteran of international competition, a guy who's been in EuroLeague, MVP and those types of things. Carlo's not ready to kind of fill that role, but he's a guy that if you give him minutes, he's going to put up good counting numbers. But does he make you a better team? Does he help you win basketball games ultimately? I don't think so. Not at this stage. So, everything you have to give, let's put these big, kosher grains of salt on them, because the Pelicans are really, you know, you didn't get players that are your future out of this. Eves Misi still, I think that you're still looking for an upgrade at the center position next season, and that is something that the Pelicans will be looking into. If he comes back and he's the starting center, then fine. I don't think you're mad about that, but you know that there are limitations and liabilities that come with his game. if the Pelicans are going to get better, I think the thing that we all can acknowledge and recognize is that it's going to have to start and there with getting back to an identity and whether or not Willie Green is the head coach of this team. In his post game comments, Willie mentioned that the team got away from its identity this season. And it has been my belief that since they drafted Zion Williamson, the identity of this team needed to be start on the defensive end and turn defense into offense, become aggressive that way. And again, if you're using the Oklahoma City Thunder as the template, that's really what I was looking for. Is that the Oklahoma City Thunder are the best defensive team in the league, and they are fantastic in transition. They are not overly reliant on the three, but they take it in a good number. And it's just they have so many guys who can score, and that was the identity I thought that the Pelicans were always trying to build. And if you look at the future, the evolution of this team over the 6 years, there were hints that they were on that track, though they never fully committed to it. And we'll talk more about the commitment part of that in a moment. But if we want to talk about the style of play, let's go back 6 years. You draft Zion Williamson and you have Alvin Gentry as your head coach. And what is Alvin? He understands that this team has to play quick because that's his philosophy anyway. But he's not a dumb guy when it comes to offense. Again, let's not talk about the failures. We're just talking about that what did go right and in formulating where the Pelicans the direction that they were supposed to be going. So Alvin understood they needed to play fast. That is the way the NBA works right now. If you unless you're going to be, let's say, the Detroit Pistons, but even they understand that at times you got to play with tempo. They are more physical in the half court and they're going to do those things. But I think everybody in the league understands that controlling tempo is very important. And when you look at the Pelicans, the roster that they've had and the player that you have in Zion Williamson, Zion is at his best in the open court. We've heard that so many times. You can't stop him in the open court. He's a freight train in the open court. Even though he's so good in the half court and just hard to stop one-on-one, he's unstoppable. Basically, like the juggernaut. Once the juggernaut keeps moving, he's unstoppable, right? That's Zion Williamson in the open court. So you got that in bursts when he came into the league as a rookie. Very short season, of course, but you got that in bursts. And the Pelicans overall, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, everybody played up tempo. So then you get rid of Alvin Gentry. Stan Van Gundy also understands. Hey, I want to shoot threes. I want to play defense. Stan wanted to play defense. And Stan brings Point Zion to the table. Again, failures aside, those were the takeaways. What are you building on? Stan saw what the tempo worked, got that, knew that he needed to tighten up the defense. We all can agree on that. Defense need to get better. And the last third of his season, the defense was much better because the team was much healthier. And he instituted the Point Zion, and I think that helps your defense because your offense is more efficient. So all those things, that circle of life, that's how it works. The offense was better. The defense got better. Guys got healthier. You still had problems, though, in the fit of your roster because you're still trying to find the fit and the identity. And that is not uncommon when you take on a generational talent. You have to mix and match and find out who's going to suit that player, which player's skill sets and mentalities and timetables all fit in with your franchise player. But the Pelicans started hedging their bets because of Zion's injuries in building the roster. So then when you bring Willie Green in and you lose Zion for the year and you've brought in, a roster that was incomplete at the start of that third season, Willie Green's first season. Now Willie's got to figure out what he's going to do. So you brought in a first-time head coach who really didn't know what he was going to do offensively. And you bring him in, but his principles are, I want this team to be a defensive team. He said it on day one of his press conference. We're going to start on what we do on the defensive end. He said it again today. We got away from our defensive identity. We were building a team. We started here last year. The second year we were in the top 10. Last year we were in the top 5. Offense had moved into the top 10. Even though there were some smoke and mirrors along with that, you cannot argue about the facts of the progression statistically. Okay, though. David Griffin himself admits that the defense was flawed against very good teams, and you obviously offensively had problems in getting wins late. You didn't win a single game that you trailed in the fourth quarter, and then you also had a team that didn't win at home. You were a 21 win team at home, which was embarrassing considering you had the most road wins in the NBA at 28. So you still were not right, but the identity part that Willie understood of making this a defensive team that could create offense, that kernel was right. The implementation flawed. The roster flawed. The coaching acumen not optimal. Let's say that. So when that's all the case, if that's the thing, um, then what fell apart? The team never picked players that fit the identity that they were trying to establish. And when they did, they ended up getting rid of the players that fit the identity for players it just by chasing players for particular skill sets. Okay. So whose fault is that? Well, I think that blame has to go to David Griffin. And that's why his future is in doubt. Reports have started to surface from Mark Stein and others that everybody in the Pelicans organization is kind of bracing for Griff's exit this week. That there's problems within the franchise, that there is turmoil about some of the decisions that he's made. And it kind of goes back, the way it's cited in Mark Stein's Substack, is that it goes back to the trade of Dyson Daniels to Atlanta for DeJounte Murray. Now, why are those things connected in my mind? Let's connect it because of the defensive part. If you're going to say, as David Griffin said when he traded Brandon Ingram, that this team was not as good as it thought it was defensively because they couldn't play defense against good teams, but then in the offseason, you got rid of every outstanding defensive player who wasn't named Herb Jones. You got rid of Dyson Daniels, who's now a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. You got rid of your best two interior defenders in Jonas Valanciunas, who was underrated as a defensive center because of what he did on the boards and because of his physicality. No, he's not ever going to make an all defensive first team, and that wasn't the job. But when you look at statistically what the Pelicans defense was when he was on the floor versus when he was gone, they were better with him on the floor because you had to deal with him defensively. So you got rid of him. You got rid of your second best defender and you're probably your best shot blocker in Larry Nance. You let Najee Marshall walk to Dallas where he's flourishing. So you got rid of the heart of the defense. So when you do that, you come back and you bring this team together. And Willie Green said in his post game comments on Sunday that it's hard to have defensive continuity when everybody's hurt. But there are certain things that you knew were going to be a problem defensively. DeJounte Murray had slipped on the defensive end. And if you go to thebirdrights.com, you can check out that last year there was an article that we wrote about DeJounte Murray and what problem could arise from his lack of his decline defensively. That just because he had good steals numbers didn't mean that he was still a good defender. And I think you saw this year that DeJounte was not good at the point of attack on defense. And he was supposed to be the guy at the top. He was supposed to be the tip of the spear. Okay. And he was not. Guards were able to get to the paint. He did not do his job on that end of the floor. You lost Herb Jones. You could argue, though, that Zion Williamson was your best defensive player this season with the absence of Herb Jones. Brandon Ingram didn't play a lick of defense this season. I'm sorry. And Yves Missi was going through the growing pains of learning how to play center in the NBA when he hasn't had an extensive basketball career to speak of it as a whole. So you got a rookie at center, which is the second most difficult position to transition to the NBA. Center and point guard are the two most difficult positions because I think the other ones are more offensive positions. You kind of feel your way, and in space your roles are pretty defined. But center is hard because of the physicality and what your responsibilities are at the rim. There's no zone to protect you like there is in college and things like that. And then point guard, of course, because of all the myriad of responsibilities that you have on the floor. So even with everybody being healthy, the Pelicans were reliant on Herb Jones to be the defensive catalyst. And that's a hell of a responsibility for one guy. It's a hell of a responsibility. So Griff has to take those shots. I think when you look at David Griffin's tenure, there's a case to be made that he could keep his job. There are successes. Okay. Um, but it's it's really not that hard though to see these rumors of his demise being accurate because you're 6 years into this and you are no closer to winning a championship than when you started this. You might be farther away. And he's been the guy that's gone through three head coaches. And I don't think you can allow a general manager to make the decision on a fourth. You know, whether you count the Alvin Gentry hire on his ledger or not. Um, you fired Alvin 1 year in, you fired Stan 1 year in, and now with Willie, and as I've said it before, 11 of the past 13 coaches to win the NBA championship did so within 4 years. 6 of those were first time coaches. Of those 6, all of them did it within 4 years. The majority of them did it in year 1 or 2. One did it in 1 year, in year 3, one did it in year 4. So you don't get a long amount of time to turn a franchise around. 4 years is about the window. And I don't think the Pelicans are turned around. I think they're if you say they're continuously spinning around in a whirlpool that's kind of going nowhere, I'm with you there, but they don't have a direction. And that ultimately is on Griff as well. I think his biggest problem is that, while he built up the organizational structure, the business side of doing, being an NBA basketball team, he did build that up, obviously. I think, he replenished the front office and fleshed it out. Um, he modernized the facilities, obviously, and brought in people, sports scientists to do manage player health, though that has not worked the way certainly that fans and players would like. He did do that. He did make that move. He has corrected his mistakes for the most part when he's made or attempted to, but the mistakes that he's made have been too many. And I think they all go back to year one and not deciding in year one that we're just going to ride this Zion thing out 100%. And they didn't. While we are in year 6 of this, there has never been that full commitment to Zion Williamson and building his career and building a team around him. That first year, when you have Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball all come in, if you're going to be young and bad, be young and bad. I think the Pelicans fans would have been fine with that being young and bad in that 1 year because that's the expectation when you don't get the number one pick for being good. So you don't have to be in a hurry to turn this around. Shaq didn't make the playoffs his rookie year. LeBron James didn't make the playoffs his rookie year. Allen Iverson didn't make the playoffs his rookie year. You can be bad the first year, but Griff was unwilling to be bad in his first year. So you go out and you get Derek Favors. And I don't think Derek was a mistake as far as the player that he was, but I think the intentions were bad. Griff's understanding of what he was doing with Derek were like, oh, we're going to turn him into this offensive weapon. That's not who Derek Favors was. He was a defensive player. That was his job. And he did a good job defensively, but he was not the kind of offensive player that Griff expected to be. As the word I think that most people will kind of bristle at when you hear from Griff is the word unleash, because you've heard it with so many players. We're going to unleash this guy. We're going to unleash Drew Holiday and make him an MVP. That was a mistake. As soon as you got those other guys, you should have traded Drew immediately. 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 Having to go a year of that and then trade Drew to the Bucks. Mistake. Drafting Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander Walker. Mistake. That second number one pick, either you take one guy, because you can only have so many young guys. Again, you can the problem with the Thunder that they're going to have to face and deal with is that they have so many young guys now. The problem is there's not enough minutes for everybody. You were already turning a team over. You couldn't, and you're expecting to win, but you brought in all these young guys for a veteran coach on the last year of his contract that you brought him back on, and you're asking him to win now. but also develop these young guys. And you cannot serve those two masters. It doesn't work that way. But that's what they asked for Alvin Gentry in that first year. Those are mistakes on David Griffin. Then bringing in Stan wasn't a mistake. I don't think it was a mistake. It didn't work, but hiring him was not a mistake. But the things you did that season, trading for Eric Bledsoe and not demanding instead a Dante DiVincenzo, who has proven to be a better player than Eric Bledsoe because Eric Bledsoe's not in the league. You got George Hill, who you ended up having trade to Oklahoma City, who's also no longer in the league. But you got nothing other than Eric Bledsoe and a couple of picks that you also squandered. So that was also a Griff mistake. Not moving Lonzo Ball for Lauri Markkanen when you had the opportunity. Mistake. Could Lauri Markkanen have helped this team while he's been wasting away in Utah? Absolutely. Was he a franchise defining piece? No. Was he the guy who's going to get you over the hump to a championship? No. But he was a near all-star level performer on a good team if he's giving you 21 points, shooting at 40% from three, and rebounding at a decent level. You know what I'm saying? So that's a Griff mistake that he has to own. And each one of those mistakes took you further away from, even though the win totals were going up, it took you further away from your ultimate goal of winning a championship because you didn't have the kind of team that was going to match the things. It wasn't going to be um, it wasn't going to be the kind of franchise that was aligned at all those levels because you had players on different timelines. You had veterans who were thinking about winning now in their careers. You had rookies and young players who were trying to figure out who they were as a career. And you didn't commit to saying Zion Williamson is our guy and we're building around him. I understand the injuries and you're worried about that. But let's look at other teams that had to deal with injuries with their star players early on. They didn't turn away, like whether or not it was Ja Morant getting hurt or whether Joel Embiid was getting hurt in Philly. What Philly did at that time when Joel Embiid was getting hurt early on in his career was they just kept stockpiling centers in Joel's place, but we're still trying to figure out who's going to play well with him when he's back. That didn't work ultimately because similarly to what the Pelicans did, not committing early on, trying the Markelle Fultz route, trying the Ben Simmons route, keep adding these other number one picks who expect to be franchise level players, but you're really building around Joel Embiid. You've made a mistake. Jahlil Okafor as well in Philly. So all those types of things, those are mistakes. And that's why Philly's in the situation it's in, a similar situation to the Pelicans in some ways. An oft injured superstar, disappointments in the postseason, and a lack of availability and a lack of an identity too. So when you look at teams like the Rockets, when you look at teams like the Grizzlies, when you look at teams like the Thunder, their leadership has been consistent in what it's doing as far as roster building, as far as organizationally, and finding the coach who matches that philosophy. Whether and firing them if they don't feel like it, like they are in alignment anymore. So for David Griffin, I think that yeah, so many mistakes have been made, and outside of him being one of the most fortunate front office executives ever in getting LeBron James deciding on his own. That wasn't a Griff pitch to Cleveland. If the question was the Cleveland can make the cap space, I'm going back to Cleveland. That was a LeBron decision independent of the owner and the front office. And having LeBron allows you to get Kevin Love, allows you to get, you already had Kyrie Irving, who you got as a number one pick, and David Griffin did not pick Kyrie Irving. So you don't get credit for that pick. And then having LeBron gives you access to all these other players who sign as free agents, or you're able to make trades for them because LeBron demands it. Okay, so with the Pelicans, Griffin's averaging somewhere around 37 wins per season over 6 years. That's not good enough. It's not good enough. So if Griffin is out, then I think that means for Willie Green is he's going to have to wait for a decision from the next general manager. And I would imagine, or executive vice president, whatever the title is for that next person. And I would imagine that person is going to be very serious about making a decision because we've talked about this, so many times about coaches winning early on in their careers. And Willie at year 4, it's usually time to fish or cut bait after 4 years. what is the ultimate direction of the franchise going to be? That the first domino will be the decision on David Griffin, and I would expect that early this week. I don't think the Pelicans can afford to kind of let this linger, knowing that you have to get prepared for the draft lottery. And if you are going to keep David Griffin, you need to announce that quickly. If you're going to fire him, you need to announce it quickly because the pool of talent, the competition for talent is going to be severe because so many teams are shaking up their front offices this year, whether it be their coaching position or their executives. And the Pelicans can't afford to be behind the curve on this. So the decision should already be made if there is one to be made. If David Griffin's going to be fired, then that decision should already have been made by the New Orleans Pelicans um, ownership and Gail Benson. So if we are looking ahead to the lottery, again, that's May 12th for the draft lottery for in the NBA, and the Pelicans are locked in um, at that fourth spot with a 12.5% chance of getting the number one pick. The top three teams each have a 14% pick, 14% chance. The Jazz have the worst record in the league with 17 wins, followed by the Wizards, then the Hornets at 19 wins. Um, the Pelicans, like I said, were not in threat. I never thought they were going to fall out of the top four. They finished 3 games ahead of the 76ers, who could end up giving that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder, which would just be sick for the Thunder to end up with a top 5 pick after putting up 68 wins and having a team this young. If they get at a top 5 pick, I trade, but if to get another star and try to bolster this championship window that they've got going. But the Pelicans will have that fourth pick, and it's time to start looking to the players. So we'll be doing that as we get close. Just continue to examine the rumors, continue to examine the players. We'll go up and down the roster and assess what players' seasons were like and what their future could be with this franchise. So we got plenty to discuss in the weeks ahead. A lot to discuss. We will do every player individually, go through the front court, go through the back court, go through the reserves, go through the G League. We're gonna talk about those players. We're gonna talk about so many of these players as we go through the offseason. But again, that first date, May 12th, is when the draft lottery will be in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. So they'll have the draft lottery in Chicago. Um, Again, if the Pelicans are in the top four, obviously if they go number one, they're taking Cooper Flag. I think if they get number two, it's Dylan Harper. Um, and then below that, if they fall out of the top four, um, or if you're asking me today, um, I think Connor Knippel out of Duke, if they fall out of the top four. It's also a potential trade pick, depending on how low you fall. But if you fall to 5, let's say, I wouldn't mind a Connor Knippel, a guy who can shoot the three and also was the MVP of the ACC tournament. And by a lot of people around the country, a lot of draft experts and college basketball observers, he's a guy who could have been the best. If Cooper Flag didn't exist, he could have been the best freshman in America this year, along with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper and VJ Edgecombe. It could have been Connor Knippel out of Duke. So we shall see. But thank you for watching. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you comment. Make sure you subscribe. If you got draft questions, you got team questions for this year, go ahead and put those down below, and we'll make sure that we address those for you. Um, Make sure you follow me on social media at DM Grubb. And be sure to check out thebirdrights.com for Pelicans information each and every day. Until the next time, I am David Grubb. This has been Pelicans Daily, brought to you by Fan Arch. And y'all have a great day.